Baba Hari Singh Ji, Bhagpur ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਬਾਬਾ ਜਵਾਲਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਹਰਿਆਣਾ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ
In New Delhi,
ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ
violence
ਵਾਕਿਆ
erupted
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ
around one of the
ਹਮਕਬਾਨੀ
Sikhs'
ਜਿਹੜੀ
principal
ਉੱਥੇ
temples,
ਸੰਗਤਾਂ
with
ਨਾਲ
both
ਸਾਂਝੇ
abuse
ਕੀਤੇ
and
ਸਨ
stones being hurled from
ਸੋ
its upper
ਬੀਬੀ
stories.
ਜੀ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦਾ ਪੇਕਾ ਘਰ ਦਾ
Occasionally, the
ਪਿਛੋਕੜ
Sikhs made forays into the
ਤੇ ਬਾਬਾ
surrounding
ਸੇਵਾ
streets,
ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
battling
ਅਨੰਦਪੁਰ
several
ਸਾਹਿਬ
hundred police
ਵਾਲਿਆਂ
who
ਦੇ
tried
ਨਾਲ
to
ਜੁੜ ਕੇ
contain them with tear gas.
ਇਸ ਦੇਸ਼ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਸਰਦਾਰ
But the
ਸਾਹਿਬ
wind
ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
dispersed it quickly,
ਸਰਦਾਰ
and
ਠਾਕੁਰ
sometimes the
ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
Sikhs threw the canisters
ਜੋ
back, forcing the
ਬਹੁਤ
police
ਗੁਰੂ
to
ਕੇ ਪਿਆਰ
retreat.
ਵਾਲੇ ਸੇਵਾਦਾਰ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ
The two
ਸਾਡੇ
sides
ਨਾਲ
surged
ਚੱਲ ਗਏ
back
ਨੇ
and forth around the
ਤੇ
temple gate.
ਹੋਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਭਾਈ ਹਰਦੇਵ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
There were
ਤੇ
casualties
ਹਰਦੀਪ
on
ਸਿੰਘ
both
ਜੀ
sides.
ਜੋਗਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
Policemen were hit by the
ਚਾਚਾ ਦਰਸ਼ਨ
barrage of
ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
missiles.
ਪੁਰਾਣਿਆਂ 'ਚ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਪੁਰਾਣੀ
And when the
ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੇ
police
ਬਹੁਤ
ran
ਸੇਵਾ
out of
ਨਾਲ ਨਾਲ ਪਿੰਡੋ ਵਾਲੇ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਸਾਰਾ ਜਥਾ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਕਰਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਕਰਦੇ
elsewhere
ਰਹੇ
in
ਨੇ
northern India,
ਸੋ
other more
ਇਹੀ
vicious
ਲਗਨ
battles were
ਬੀਬੀ
going
ਜੀ ਨੂੰ
on. In all, more than a dozen people were
ਹੋਈ
reported killed today,
ਸਰਦਾਰ
adding to
ਗੁਰਦੇਵ
the
ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ
hundreds who've died in
ਉਹ
the
ਵੀ ਗੁਰੂ
past
ਕੇ
couple
ਪਿਆਰ
of
ਵਾਲੇ
days.
ਗੁਰੂ ਦਰ ਤੇ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ
A
ਸੇਵਾ
backlash
ਕਰਨ
like
ਵਾਲੇ
this was expected. The
ਸਭ
Indian
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ
Home
ਧਰਮ
Ministry put
ਪਰਸਨ
police
ਵਾਲੇ
on alert all over
ਸੋ
India,
ਸੱਚੇ
warning them to
ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ ਮਿਹਰ
stand by to
ਕਰਨ
protect public
ਇਹ ਕੋਈ
buildings.
ਸਿਫਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ
That
ਸਾਧ
warning was
ਸੰਗਤ
issued with the news that
ਕਿਉਂਕਿ
the
ਇਹ
army
ਡਰ
had
ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈ
captured the Golden Temple at
ਇੱਥੇ
Amritsar
ਸਭ ਨੂੰ ਆਉਣਾ
after a
ਚਾਹੀਦਾ
3-day battle.
ਜਿਹੜੇ
Now
ਵਰਗਿਆਂ
the
ਨੂੰ
likelihood of
ਸਾਨੂੰ
trouble has
ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ
increased with the news that
ਸਿੱਖ
the
ਨੂੰ
Sikh militant
ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼
leader
ਕਰਨੀ
Sant
ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ
Bhindranwale
ਰੋਜ਼
has
ਨਹੀਂ ਆ
been found
ਸਕਦਾ
dead.
ਜਿੰਨਾ ਸਮਾਂ ਵੀ ਆਵੇ ਹਫਤੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਹੋਣਾ
To
ਚਾਹੀਦਾ
his followers,
ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਆਪਣੀ
Bhindranwale was a
ਹਾਜ਼ਰੀ
holy man with a
ਆਪਣੇ
vision of an
ਸਤਿਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਚਰਨਾਂ
autonomous
'ਚ ਆ
Sikh
ਕੇ
state. To
ਜ਼ਰੂਰ
his
ਲਗਵਾਉਣੀ
opponents, he was a
ਚਾਹੀਦੀ
ruthless fanatic
ਮਹਾਂਪੁਰਖ
who
ਵੀ
ordered the
ਦੱਸਦੇ ਆ
deaths of
ਕਿ
hundreds in the
ਕੋਈ
hope of
ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ
achieving
ਹੀ
it.
ਘਰ ਦਾ ਪਿਆਰ ਨਾ ਆ ਜਾਵੇ
Blending nationalism and
ਸਾਰੇ
religion,
ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੀ
rather like an
ਲੱਤ
Indian Ayatollah Khomeini,
ਸੋ
he
ਸਾਡਾ
inspired his
ਹੈਡਕੁਆਟਰ
followers both to
ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ
kill and
ਗੁਰੂ
to
ਗ੍ਰੰਥ
die.
ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸ਼ਹਿਨਸ਼ਾਹ
Moderate Sikh leaders, with whom the government might have compromised, found their support dwindling. Now, with Bhindranwale a martyr, they've been eclipsed.
Violence is always endemic in this country and under the surface, and I'm sure it will continue for quite some time.
I commanded a force of mixed troops. There were Hindus, there were Biharis, there were Rajputs, there were Madrasis, there were Garhwalis, there were Kumaunis, there were Sikhs. They were all mixed troops. I'm a Sikh myself. And we had to understand the reasons for which we were going in, as brought out by my predecessors on the mic. This was as a last resort, and we could not help but entering the Golden Temple complex so that the country was not held to ransom any longer. Some of these buildings and observation towers which were overlooking the main defenses had to be eliminated by me by preliminary operations slightly earlier on that evening. That I'm talking of the evening of the 5th/6th June, the 5th night. So somewhere around about 7 o'clock or so in the evening, I had to launch a preliminary operation to secure the Hotel Temple View, to secure the Akhara, and I also had to remove the top portion of both observation towers as well as the top portion of the water tank, because these were very heavily fortified with machine guns, and they wouldn't have permitted any movement of my troops even to approach the areas from which we were to be launched. As far as the other buildings are concerned, which were in occupation by the extremists, I decided that we should leave them alone, as I didn't have resources to deal with them. But I did have a cordon all around the Golden Temple complex with approximately an infantry battalion and an equivalent force from paramilitary forces. The aim of this cordon was to prevent any extremist from getting away from the Golden Temple complex, though I realized that in small bits and pieces of ones and twos, it may be possible for some of them to get away, because it was totally impossible to seal the entire circle. As far as the fortifications are concerned, the rooftops, the second floor, the first floor, the ground floor of all buildings were fortified. They had bunkers, they had fire trenches, they had the windows converted, doors converted, domes converted, gates converted, every conceivable thing converted into fixed defenses. I realized that even the approach to the Golden Temple complex would mean heavy casualties, but these had to be accepted. This position had been fortified into a very impregnable bastion.
Killed. Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was among 250 Sikhs who died in hand-to-hand fighting there. In an interview before troops stormed the temple, he said, "We may be killed, but a Sikh never weeps." Today, thousands of Sikhs took to the streets in the Punjab, and rioting spread to Bombay, to Kashmir, and the mountain retreat of Simla, where the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, was due to go on holiday. In the capital, New Delhi, there were fierce clashes between Sikhs and police, and gunfire was reported to be coming from one Sikh shrine. Ken Rees in London has been following developments.
New Delhi today, and thousands of angry Sikhs take to the streets to protest at the death of their militant leader, Sant Bhindranwale. The police were also out in large numbers. Inevitably, there was soon conflict. The Sikhs stood their ground in a park, and all day long the battle raged. It was matched by similar angry scenes in many parts of the country, as India's 15 million Sikhs hailed their dead leader as a martyr. Young people chanted Bhindranwale's name as they threw stones at the police. Moderate Sikhs closed businesses and markets to protest at the temple bloodbath. There was sporadic gunfire in the streets. Shops and stalls were set on fire. In this riot in Delhi, one boy was killed. Nationally, the death toll today is put at over 20, with scores of police also injured. In some towns, Sikhs used swords against the police.
There will be more violence. Violence for violence. We'll take blood for blood. We have become fanatic. Let them know. Why? They should know. They should know. Why should we be quiet? They are killing us. We shouldn't say anything.
No.
This is a democracy.
It's okay.
It will be blood for blood. For every drop of blood, we'll kill as many people. We'll kill as many people. And the bitches, she is going to pay for it.
Well, this is all what people feel at the moment, because naturally they are injured and they will not resist like this. And in future too, they will not tolerate injustice.
Tonight there's widespread tension as people wait to see how the majority of moderate Sikhs will react to the storming of the Golden Temple and the killing of Sant Bhindranwale. In recent years, the Golden Temple of Amritsar has become a place of refuge for militant Sikhs. Yesterday, Mrs. Gandhi decided enough was enough and sent in the army. Sant Bhindranwale was one of the last to die. He told ITN through an interpreter last year that he and his men would fight to the death for their cause.
Sikhs desire complete independence, remaining in India.
As violence flared in the Punjab, the government sent first the police and then the army into the temples. Before Bhindranwale's death, Mrs. Gandhi told Andrew Neil of the Sunday Times why she felt she had to take such a tough line against these sensitive and holy Sikh shrines. That the death of Bhindranwale has created a martyr who, after death, will unite militant and moderate Sikhs in violent action against Mrs. Gandhi's government.
And another community leader accused the Indian government of carrying out a witch hunt against Sikh leaders. Mr. Harjit Singh was asked if he thought the violence would continue.
It's very difficult to say, but I'm sure, knowing the Sikhs as I do, that they will not rest until all those martyrs who gave their lives for this noble cause of Sikh sovereignty, and I don't mean sovereignty in the political sense, purely sovereignty in the sense of the Sikhs being a distinct religious, cultural and ethnic community, until that is achieved, no true Sikh will rest. And indeed, we have a great history of martyrdom, and the names of Sant Bhindranwale, General Subhag Singh, who also died, and by Amrik Singh, who was the president of the Indian Sikh Students' Federation, which is now proscribed. These names will be written in golden letters in the history of Sikh martyrdom. And we like to think that these martyrs have not died in vain, that from the ashes of these martyrs, the Sikhs will hopefully get a new spirit of freedom, and that every
sacred shrine, the Golden Temple of Amritsar. Here, demonstrators threw bricks and stones at the Indian High Commission in Liverpool, and a policeman was slightly burned by a petrol bomb. 2 Birmingham offices were also hit by petrol bombs.
In Birmingham, petrol bombers attacked a travel agent for Air India early this morning. The front of the shop was smashed and the interior extensively damaged as the flames spread rapidly before being tackled by firemen. No claim of responsibility has been made, but the shop owners feel that being agents for India's national airline made them targets for Sikh extremists. In another part of the city, an Indian bank was also petrol bombed, but no damage was done. In Liverpool, a crowd of 200 Sikhs converged on the Indian High Commission near the city centre. Tempers flared when they were not allowed to get too close to the building, and 3 policemen were slightly injured when missiles, including 2 petrol bombs, were thrown at them. The tension eased when a small delegation was allowed in to register a formal complaint at the Indian government's handling of the Amritsar situation.
It's now thought that at least 500 people died when Indian troops moved into the Golden Temple to flush out the Sikh militants. Mrs. Gandhi has defended the operation as unavoidable. Jane Corbin of Channel 4 News is in New Delhi. We've just had this satellite report from her.
The atmosphere in Delhi's old city today has been tense, but so far there's been no repeat of yesterday's rioting, which claimed 3 Sikh lives. The police have drawn back from the Sikh temple, where the men were killed, but they're ready to move in if required. Outside the temple, Sikhs shouted, "Bhindranwale is a martyr. Hundreds will spring up to take his place." Prominent moderate Sikhs have turned against the government. Khushwant Singh is a member of the Indian Parliament and ex-editor of the influential Hindustan Times. Today, in disgust, he returned a government award he'd won some years ago. He's written extensively on Sikh history and culture and says Indira Gandhi's action, violating a shrine, is unprecedented in Indian and in Sikh history.
Mrs. Gandhi is left with no one to talk to now. The Akali leaders were the only people she could talk to. They are not going to talk to her for a long time to come. And in any case, she's locked them up too. Who is she going to talk to?
Sikh extremists are continuing to burn and loot Hindu businesses outside Amritsar, as they were earlier this week. 10 people have been killed in retaliation for the deaths of the Golden Temple. Sikhs claim the death toll in the Punjab is now 1,000. The army says it's nearer 300.
हम आपको स्वर्ण मंदिर के उन स्थानों पर ले चलें जहां वास्तव में ये घटनाएं घटी और जिनका ब्यौरा आपको दिया जा रहा है।
Sacred shrine. Many threatened revenge and demanded an independent Sikh state in India.
The Sikhs have promised violence against Indian organisations in Britain this week in retaliation for the deaths in Amritsar. They vowed Mrs. Gandhi will pay a heavy price for the attack on their temple, calling for her death as they attacked her effigy. Many were armed with ceremonial swords and daggers. Proud fighters, they are taught that violence is a legitimate means of revenge. Men wore orange ribbons, symbols of warriors prepared to die for their cause. As the march moved slowly through central London, sightseers were handed leaflets calling for British intervention to win a separate province for Sikhs in India, or even a Sikh government in exile here. Last week, Sikhs attacked the Indian High Commission with petrol bombs. Today, police were ready for them outside the buildings, encircling the area and diverting the march. Protesters took out their frustration on more effigies of Mrs. Gandhi, setting fire to them as they walked. There were only 4 arrests for minor public order offences. Police commended the marchers on a peaceful demonstration. Anne Lucas, ITN, Central London.
We're just getting pictures of more fighting, and there have been big Sikh demonstrations against Mrs. Gandhi in Delhi. Security forces say they found a grenade factory near the Golden Temple in Amritsar. Police now say 700 died there on Wednesday, including the extremist leader Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Some Sikhs say 1,000 were killed, including women and children. We've just had this report from Jane Corbin of Channel 4 News, who's in India.
The Indian government has been using its television service to try and convince Indians and foreign observers that the Golden Temple is unharmed and life there is returning to normal despite the curfew. Foreign journalists are still banned from the Punjab, but Indian television has released edited versions of its coverage. The army is cleansing the temple and religious rites are once again being observed. But the killing continues. A statement by General Bra, himself a Sikh, defending the invasion of the temple, was interrupted by Sikh gunfire.
All I can say is that they were operating from the Golden Temple, which was the nerve center of crime, instructions. They were sending out death warrants to people. They were ordering murders of innocent people all over the country. You can still hear them firing outside the Golden Temple. Anyway, the fact is that every day there were large number of murders being committed all over the country under instructions from the Golden Temple. These terrorists, I don't think had regard for life at all. They were functioning from the holy shrine, a place for worship, and yet they've converted this into an arsenal. They've converted it into a terrorist camp.
In Delhi today, Sikhs held protests outside the temple where 2 men were killed by police 3 days ago. Older, moderate Sikhs had tried to persuade the crowd to remain calm in view of the heavy police presence outside the temple. But they were overruled by younger Sikhs who burnt the Indian flag and raised a saffron flag, representing their desire for an independent...
Clasping the ceremonial sword, the traditional symbol of power, he asks God's blessing for a peaceful protest. Within an hour, he's joined 30,000 others in the biggest demonstration of Sikh anger and resentment ever seen in Britain. The cries are for the death of Mrs. Gandhi and the downfall of her government. To these people, her army's storming of the Golden Temple, their holy shrine, was a brutal and unforgivable act. Effigies of the Indian Prime Minister attracted the full force of the demonstrators' fury.
The insult which has been inflicted on Golden Temple, they can never forget. The yellow ribbons which they are tying on their head show that they are ready to die for the cause. And there are a large number of them.
By mid-afternoon, the long and colourful march had set off along Oxford Street and on towards the Indian High Commission 3 miles away. The march leaders insisted on carrying their swords as a religious symbol. The police agreed. What they were not prepared to do was to allow the demonstrators to get within 100 yards of India House. Mounted police sealed off every approach, and other officers wearing riot gear were discreetly kept out of sight, but ready for any possible attack on the High Commission building. Effigies were set alight, but police managed to keep the marchers moving. Boisterous but peaceful then in London, but in the Indian capital of New Delhi, about 3,000 protesters smashed a police shelter and hurled the debris into the street outside the main Sikh temple. 250 miles to the north, Brian Hanrahan has been following events in the holy city of Amritsar and the growing discontent in the Indian army.
The task of clearing up the Golden Temple is both urgent and difficult. Urgent because until the temple is restored, it's an aid to those who advocate Sikh violence. Difficult because the militants fortified it so thoroughly that some are still holding out, sniping even while Indian TV tried to show a reassuring interview with an Indian general.
I have no doubt in my mind that they have received foreign assistance. From some of the weapons that we've captured, we can see clearly the identification we can clearly establish that these weapons have been obtained from China or Pakistan. They've got Chinese markings, and I'm sure they've been smuggled in through Pakistan.
The general praised the loyalty of his troops, including Sikhs who joined the attack, but other Sikh troops have been less loyal. The 9th Battalion of the Sikh Regiment appear to have mutinied from their barracks just outside the Punjab. Fear of further mutinies and regimental honour combined to put an official silence over the Sikh regiment's cantonments at Lal Garh on the edge of the Indian desert. But local people, including one senior state official, confirmed that last Thursday, 200 soldiers took army vehicles and weapons and set off on the road to the Punjab border. The police have checkpoints at regular intervals along the way, and at the first the soldiers opened fire, killing one constable and wounding another. Then they went on to the border town of Ganganagar to protest about the government's actions at Amritsar. The soldiers' demonstration was short-lived. They beat up the town for a while, shouting slogans in favour of the dead Sikh leader. They fired some rounds indiscriminately. They killed one calf and one cow, but no people, and then set off to try and cross the border into Punjab. Instead of the heavily patrolled main road, they took a sandy track. But somewhere in the desert, they ran into loyal army units and fought a battle. Some were captured, but not all. The rest are either still at large or dead. The desert itself is one of the roots of the problem. The Punjab's neighbour states are dry and arid, but an irrigation system draws water from the Punjab for them. The Sikhs want to keep the Punjab water for themselves, another cause of quarrel between the Sikhs and their Hindu neighbours. The mutiny has done nothing to help the strained relations on the border zone. The police say while the Sikhs are grieving, the Hindus are giving sweets to their children to celebrate. Trouble is just beneath the surface. But in the long term, another worry for the government is that using the army to quell communal disturbances
deserted from the army. 600 are now reported to have left the army.
That unrest within its own forces is far from over. There have been reports of new mutinies among Sikh troops in several Indian states. The government claims most mutineers have been arrested and several killed by loyal troops. Land and air searches have been mounted for the rest. One group was captured just inside the Punjab, presumably on its way to Amritsar, and there have also been mutinies in Bihar state and near Bombay. Latest reports speak of soldiers in Kashmir deserting, though again details are sparse. From India, Brian Hanrahan reports.
The authorities want Amritsar to start getting back to normal. They lifted the curfew for a few hours, announced afterwards there'd been no trouble while people were allowed on the streets. These pictures were provided by Indian television. There are still restrictions on travelling into and around the state, although they are being gradually relaxed. However, a former chief minister of the Punjab says the state is under the jackboot of the military, who've turned it into a prison house for Sikhs. He's called for a day of demonstration on Sunday against the army's taking of the temple. The army is still investigating the interior of the temple complex, where the militants held out and sniped at them for several days. But they say now there's been no shooting for 36 hours. Most of their efforts appear to be going into investigating the contents of a well, where the Sikh militants dumped an arsenal of arms and ammunition before they surrendered. As well as the weapons, they've also been dredging out a small fortune in banknotes. They've recovered 5 million rupees so far, about £300,000. They were also happy to show to the camera a pile of gold bracelets. While the Sikhs see those who died as martyrs, the authorities would be happy for them to be seen as gunmen and thieves. The cost of capturing the Golden Temple has been heavy in every way. The casualty figures keep rising. The army now admits 90 soldiers died. The total loss of life is put at 700, twice the original figure, and this one is by no means final. The army's been exposed to communal politics, its loyalty's been tested, and in some cases it's broken. In Ganganagar, just across the border from the Punjab, 200 Sikh soldiers broke from barracks, killed a policeman, and fled north. Across the country at Ramgarh, 500 soldiers shot a brigadier and set off for Delhi. The government say they were all captured at Allahabad, but it looks as though a big search is still going on. From Pune, another group of Sikhs advanced towards Bombay. They were intercepted, according to the government, on the outskirts. Tonight, 2 more revolts in the Sikh ranks have been reported. In both cases, the government say that those concerned have either surrendered or been persuaded back into their barracks. But throughout this rash of incidents, the government has consistently tried to make light of them, and without some form of official information...
Mental centre at Ramgarh. British Sikh leaders are planning to set up a government in exile in London to coordinate their campaign for an independent state in India. Jeremy Hands at ITN reports.
Roads into the Punjab have been blocked by the army for 10 days now. Rows of lorries, hundreds of travellers, all stranded in scorching heat. More soldiers are being brought into the troubled province. But the situation remains unclear as to either how many Sikhs died in the Battle of the Golden Temple or how much resistance the authorities are still facing. For these people, though, the waiting continues. In other parts of India, Sikh protests are still growing. Police sources say 712 Sikhs died in the fighting at the Golden Temple in Amritsar, but one prominent Sikh writer says the figure is approaching 1,000 dead, including many women and children. An all-India day of protest by Sikhs has been called for next Sunday. But it's the mutinies amongst Sikh soldiers which is causing the government most problems. Some 200 of them were arrested after mutinying and trying to force their way at gunpoint to Amritsar. The government
brings fresh mutinies in the Indian Army. Troops are said to be deserting in Kashmir, but the government claims to have put down trouble elsewhere. 126 troops surrendered in Allahabad today. Meanwhile, the Indian Army...
Now, there's a worry.
The main military activity is around bridges. At these, the army has taken over checkpoints normally manned by the police and fortified them with sandbags and machine guns. All vehicles coming from the east, the direction from which the largest group of mutineers was advancing on Delhi, is stopped and searched by troops carrying submachine guns beneath their capes. The soldiers are vigilant. More than 1,000 Sikhs are known to have rebelled, and at least 50 people have died so far in clashes between them and loyal troops.
The police have been told not to try and stop the convoy. Instead, they're to leave it to the army. But they have issued instructions to the villages.
Villages are still under curfew. The Sikhs make up about 1/10 of the Indian army, and there have been mutinies in at least 6 states. 50 people are thought to have died in fighting between soldiers. Many of the rebel troops have been trying to reach the Punjab, but the state has been sealed off. We've just received this report from our correspondent in India, Brian Hanrahan.
The Indian Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi, has been touring the Punjab's neighbouring state, Kashmir. There she addressed troops and congratulated the army for their restraint in dealing with the Sikh extremists. With Sikh soldiers placed prominently in front of her, she said the army maintained the unity of the country, and she again defended the attack on the Golden Temple as a painful and necessary step. There were also displays of local dancing, a reminder of the diversity of India's 700 million people. Mrs. Gandhi said that an attack on the integrity of India would not be tolerated. The Indian Army has deployed to prevent any of the runaway Sikhs from reaching the capital. We found heavy military traffic moving in driving rain on the roads surrounding Delhi. Convoys of lorries loaded with soldiers and guns mounted on jeeps rumbled along the roads, linking army bases to key defensive points. It's now been officially accepted that there is trouble in the Sikh ranks following the taking of the Golden Temple, but the preparations belie the official insistence that all but a few stragglers have given up or been caught. The main military activity is around bridges. At these, the army has taken over checkpoints normally manned by the police and fortified them with sandbags and machine guns. All vehicles coming from the east, the direction from which the largest group of mutineers was advancing on Delhi, is stopped and searched by troops carrying submachine guns beneath their capes. The soldiers are vigilant. 1,300 Sikhs, by the official count, are known to have rebelled, and at least 50 people have been killed in clashes between them and loyal troops. The police have been told not to try and stop the convoy. Instead, they're to leave it to the army. But they have issued instructions to the villages along the main road to Delhi to close their petrol stations and not to sell food to the deserters. Units of the Border Security Force, armed paramilitaries normally under army control, are also being bussed along the road. So far, 8 separate incidents have been reported, widely scattered across India. An investigation is underway into the most serious, where it appears that recruits left the training base after shooting their brigadier dead and wounding his second-in-command. Sikh leaders say it's entirely understandable, given the anger in the Sikh community.
In Britain, Sikhs are still unsettled and angered by reports from India. Almost 300,000 now live here. Most came in the 1960s from a background of relative wealth in the state of Punjab. One gesture from some British Sikhs is the proclamation of an independent Sikh state of Khalistan. Already unofficial passports have been printed, together with Khalistan currency in dollars and postage stamps.
We have been independent people. Our culture is different. Our language is different. Our religion is different. And we have been doing everything we could do to make India strong, to defend India. But now India has done such an act that we cannot continue doing that. and there's no way out but to establish our own homeland, our own independent state, and our own sovereignty.
Gilding.
The campaign.
Amritsar. The situation now appears to be under control.
The general officer commanding in southern India said a very serious view was being taken of what he called these deserters. They will, according to the general, be court-martialed, and if found guilty, they'll be hanged. General Oberoi went on to say nobody in the Indian army would dare to mutiny. It's clear that the army has put down the Sikh mutinies in various parts of the country with the utmost severity. In the case of the Poona mutiny, troops of the Maha regiment set up a position at a road junction on the national highway just outside Bombay. They waited for the mutineers and opened fire on them immediately they came within range. No attempt was made to persuade them to surrender.
Shrine, the Golden Temple at Amritsar. The Defence Ministry say many of the 2,000 involved were young and inexperienced, and a small fraction of the Sikhs in the Indian Army. This report by Brian Hanrahan.
Wholesale rebellion or even resignation of Sikhs from the army would be a nightmare for India. They make up 15% of the army, 110,000 men, in a country that fears war with Pakistan is always close at hand. Mrs. Gandhi has been trying to soothe them. Yesterday she was shown addressing them on television. Today she said their loyalty and patriotism was never in doubt. But all the government's reassurance was in danger of being undone when a senior general said those who deserted could face the death penalty, something that would increase the pressures on the Sikhs who'd stayed loyal. There's still uncertainty about what's happening in Punjab. On the main road to Amritsar, the army suddenly reimposed the curfew without warning. Tired passengers who'd been trying to travel for 10 days had to walk or wait again. More speculation started up that there was trouble on the road ahead. But now the government is talking of building bridges to the majority of the Sikh community who it says were uninvolved in the conspiracy.
Try to avoid more trouble. It's now thought that as many as 2,000 soldiers were involved in the mutinies after the assault on the Golden Temple of Amritsar. Ministers say some of the Sikh extremists were trained in Pakistan. But as Brian Hanrahan reports from Delhi, the government is trying to calm the situation.
Wholesale rebellion or even resignation of Sikhs from the army would be a nightmare for India. They make up 15% of the army, 110,000 men in a country that fears war with Pakistan is always close at hand. Mrs. Gandhi has been trying to soothe them. Yesterday she was shown addressing them on television. Today she said she never doubted their loyalty and patriotism. But all the government's reassurance was in danger of being undone when a general said those who deserted could face the death penalty, something that would increase the pressures on the Sikhs who'd stayed loyal. The Defence Ministry is obviously anxious to head off further trouble. An official spokesman told me that while the ringleaders and agitators would be sternly dealt with, most soldiers could expect their cases to receive sympathy and understanding. They'd been misled by false propaganda. He said many were young, they had only a few weeks' training behind them, and he accepted they'd been under emotional stress. There's still uncertainty about what's happening in Punjab. On the main road to Amritsar, the army suddenly reimposed the curfew without warning. Tired passengers who'd been trying to travel for 10 days had to walk or wait again. More speculation started up that there was trouble on the road ahead. In their anti-terrorist sweep of the state, the army have detained and are still holding 3,000 people. In Amritsar itself, the army continues to display an ever-growing collection of armaments recovered in and around the Golden Temple. The latest find has been of a grenade-making factory, with the machinery to make crude but lethal hand grenades and also guns. But now the government is talking of building bridges to the majority of the Sikh community who it says were uninvolved in the conspiracy.
They were shot at close range by the Indian army. He says the men had their hands tied behind their backs after they were captured in the storming of the Golden Temple at Amritsar last week. And villagers in the Punjab are also claiming that patrols of the Indian army are torturing and arresting people. Today, the Indian government said the Sikh extremists were trained in Pakistan and in Sikh temples in the state of Kashmir. We have two reports, from Dave Hatcher of CBS News and Jane Corbin of Channel 4 News.
Tonight, for the first time, the Indian government allowed cameras into a news conference called to explain the details of the battle fought between the army and the Sikh extremists on the 5th and 6th of June. The Home Secretary, Mr. Wali, said the government had no alternative but to use armed force.
It is quite clear now that it was a very deep-seated conspiracy to create terror in the state of Punjab with the help of certain foreign powers.
This afternoon, Mrs. Gandhi met opposition leaders. They urged her to lift censorship in the Punjab. She replied that in such a delicate situation, she did not want local papers to say anything irresponsible. She also said that unrest in the army was confined to new recruits, not officers. As the first pictures came in from Amritsar showing wounded soldiers in hospital, there were reports from a doctor who'd been taken to Amritsar to help with the casualties that 13 of the Sikh extremists who died had been shot in the head at point-blank range with a single shot from a machine gun after their turbans had been removed to tie their hands behind their back.
The government say there are still large numbers of terrorists operating in the area. They moved out of the Golden Temple and into the surrounding countryside. The army have discovered large quantities of arms. Jane Corbin, News at 10, Delhi.
In areas bordering the Punjab, military patrols are a new phenomenon. Total curfews in some Jammu neighborhoods prevent Sikh families from buying food, other essentials. Sikhs claim their villages are being harassed, and that 1,000 Sikh youths have been arrested and, they claim, tortured. The shuttered shops and silent streets belie the official line that life is normal. Nearly all Sikh farming villages are off limits to outsiders. No one really knows what the army is doing. Thousands of Indians have been stranded in Jammu. The railway stations jammed with people going nowhere. No one's been allowed to cross the Punjab until yesterday, and many won't take the risk. Unknown saboteurs exploded a grenade on the railway tracks earlier this week and disrupted service for hours.
For the first time since troops stormed it last week, army commanders said 490 Sikh extremists and 84 soldiers died in the fighting. Meanwhile, the army today quashed another rebellion by 50 Sikh soldiers in the Punjab. They'd refused to obey orders in protest at last week's siege. This report from Jane Corbin of Channel 4 News.
Today, the first foreign press party was allowed to visit Amritsar, but it was strictly limited to just a handful of correspondents. No foreign camera crews or TV reporters were allowed in. Indian television pictures of the Golden Temple showed the fortified parapets and towers. From here, an estimated 2,000 heavily armed Sikh extremists fired down on the army, inflicting heavy casualties. It took 3 battalions, tanks, and a special commando force to overcome the Sikh resistance. Army chiefs described the central square as a killing ground.
But from the basements, the extremists emerged through manholes. They got onto the covered verandas. Through these manholes, opened fire at my troops, went back through these manholes, and re-emerged into a room some 50 or 100 meters away to get into action again.
When the battle was over, nearly 500 Sikhs and 84 soldiers lay dead. The reporters said that although the marble floors had been washed clean of blood, the stench of death hung over the area still. The temple complex was riddled with bullets. Rubble and broken pillars had been piled in the central courtyard. The priests' headquarters in the temple, where the extremists made their last stand in a maze of underground passages, was extensively damaged. But the central shrine, the holiest of holies, was almost untouched. Jane Corbin, News at 10, Delhi.
The army has... There by troops. One of the biggest demonstrations was in New Delhi. Sikhs chanted anti-government slogans and burned an effigy of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Gandhi. Mrs. Gandhi has written to Mrs. Thatcher, urging her not to help the self-styled Sikh government in exile set up in Britain.
The leader of the Sikh government in exile is Dr. Jagit Singh Chauhan, a former Deputy Speaker of the Punjab State Assembly. This morning he was meeting leaders of Britain's Sikh community. The majority of the world's 12 million Sikhs live in India, but 500,000 or so live in Britain, and there are large communities in other Commonwealth countries. Dr. Chauhan and his followers want an independent Sikh homeland, which they've already named Khalistan, or Land of the Pure, and over the past few days they've even been issuing passports, currency, and postage stamps.
Our final concept is nothing less than independent, sovereign state of Khalistan, the Republic of Khalistan. That is nothing less than.
Meanwhile, in London and around the world, Sikh families have been answering the call for a day of mourning for Janal Singh Bhindranwala and others who died during and after the storming of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. Families have been fasting and praying throughout the day. John Underwood, ITN in West London.
Sikhs and soldiers died in fierce fighting 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Gandhi had been criticised by opposition politicians for not visiting the historic temple sooner, to give a lead in providing the healing touch she'd called for to repair relations with the Sikhs. Today she tried to make amends and the right gestures of respect for the shrine that Indian troops stormed on her orders. She was careful not to forget the traditional gift of money. But a daytime curfew was imposed to keep the city's residents indoors until she had gone, and no journalists accompanied her. Indian television provided heavily edited film of her 30-minute visit. They did not show her inspecting the fortified positions that had been held by the militants, or the Akal Takht, the holiest place in the Sikh religion, which suffered heavy damage. They concentrated on the undamaged areas. Opposition leaders have condemned a tough new law Mrs. Gandhi introduced on Friday, which allows imprisonment without trial in the Punjab for up to 2 years. Despite today's visit, it will clearly be some time before normal life returns to this troubled state.
They renewed demands for an independent Sikh state in the Punjab, scene of last month's bloody fighting at the Golden Temple of Amritsar.
Still outraged by the storming of the Golden Temple, the Sikhs shouted defiance against the Indian government. Many say they're prepared to die for an independent state of Khalistan. They raised its flag over the London headquarters of the Khalistan government in exile. Their leaders say they'll coordinate military incursions into India.
We are now at war with India. And unless and until we have defeated India, our war will carry on.
One of your mottos is blood for blood, and you do say death to Indira Gandhi.
What Indira Gandhi has done, she's going to get it fully.
They burned the Indian flag. Khalistan's national anthem says, "When the time comes, I shall happily sacrifice my life."
It was in the heart of the Punjab that events unfolded. On Saturday, June 2nd, the Indian government ordered its army to take over responsibility for law and order in the whole state. And from Sunday onwards, it became clear that Punjab was cut off from the rest of India. The army imposed a round-the-clock curfew, total censorship, and cut all communications. For the next 3 days, the rest of India held its breath and waited. Then last Wednesday, the army went into action. Soldiers from 3 Indian regiments, the Guards, the Gurkhas, and the Rajputs, stormed the Golden Temple. In the now famous words of their commanding officer, they went in with prayers on their lips. But within hours, it was clear that the army was locked in a fierce battle with the Sikh terrorists, and the fighting continued for all that day and that night. Then on Thursday, the government in Delhi announced that the body of Janal Singh Bhindranwale had been found, sparking off spontaneous Sikh riots across the country. On Friday, as the army began its last mopping-up operations in Amritsar against remaining terrorist hideouts, the Indian government put security forces throughout the country on alert against further disturbances. Later that day, President Zail Singh flew to Amritsar to see for himself exactly what damage the Golden Temple had suffered. And finally, on Saturday, the government officially admitted that the total death toll during the military action at the Golden Temple could be over 500, but refused to give a definite figure.
The reaction of British Sikhs to the storming of the Golden Temple was immediate. It began when the Indian High Commission in central London was attacked. Angry Sikhs smashed the front windows and threw in a paraffin device, setting the curtains ablaze. But then, as news of the raging battle and mounting casualties in Amritsar came through, Sikh feelings throughout Britain were really aroused. In London, India House became the target of emotional demonstrations every day. In Liverpool, missiles and a petrol bomb were hurled at the Indian consulate by a crowd of furious demonstrators. In Birmingham, the glass front of an Air India agency was smashed, and in the same city, the Indian government-owned Punjab National Bank was the target of an arson attack. And then finally, last Sunday, Sikhs from all over the country converged on London in the biggest protest to date. At least 20,000 marched from Hyde Park to Aldwych near India House, shouting slogans, waving banners, and attacking effigies of Mrs. Gandhi. And the feelings of these demonstrators,
and by ordinary people I mean housewives, students, people sometimes who are not very close to the Sikh religion, each one has been outraged at the totally unnecessary desecration of the Golden Temple. It's a calculated insult to Sikhs all over the world.
Country also. But now we take a look at the man who's captured the imagination of the Sikh movement and whose name is now chanted at every Sikh demonstration across the world. Sant Janel Singh Bhindranwale, a callous terrorist in the eyes of the Indian government, was a charismatic leader of Sikh extremism. Sharma has been putting together what's known about the man, whose death at the hands of the Indian army has made him, in the eyes of many Sikhs, a martyr to their cause.
Very little is known about the formative years of Sant Janel Singh Bhindranwale. He was born 36 years ago in Rodhe, near the town of Moga, in the Faridkot district of the Punjab, the youngest of 7 children born to a peasant family. What happened in the interim years, leading to his sudden rise to fame, is something of a mystery. He married and had 2 children, set up as a farmer and gained a following as a village preacher, and for many years Bhindranwale was just another holy man in just another village. But in 1978 he came to the attention of the government when he became involved in violent clashes between Sikhs and the Nirankaris, a heretical Sikh sect. It was during these disturbances that Bhindranwale probably came to the notice of the Congress Party. For, ironically, it was Mrs. Gandhi's son Sanjay who pulled the string that catapulted him to fame. Sanjay and the then Home Minister, now President, Zail Singh, were desperate to wrest power in the Punjab from the ruling Akali Dal party, and Bhindranwale provided the solution. The only way that Congress could win the election was by splitting the Sikh vote. This was Bhindranwale's brief. By denouncing the Akali Dal as too moderate, he split Sikh opinion during the 1980 election, and Congress swept back to power. In return, Congress gave the holy man help in his campaign to gain control of the Gurdwaras and push his fundamentalist line. But in the end, the help wasn't enough. His campaign was a failure. From that point on, Bhindranwale and his small band of followers were often in the headlines for disruptive and violent acts. He had become a Frankenstein's monster, turning on the very government that had created him. In 1982, after he was implicated in the murder of a newspaper editor, Bhindranwale sought refuge in the Golden Temple. It would become his home, his fort, until death. He took on the role of an exiled leader. His sermons were attended by thousands, and hundreds of radical young Sikhs joined his crusade. He courted the world's press, sometimes mocking them to the delight of his followers.
If the present agitation continues, are you not frightened that it will lead to serious communal strife between the Hindus and the Sikhs?
Unsuccessful in his aims, his campaigning from the fortress-like inner sanctum of the Golden Temple is widely believed to be responsible for a number of concessions made by Mrs. Gandhi. Sikhs were given permission to carry their sacred daggers, the kirpan, on Indian airline flights. The sale of alcohol and tobacco in the Golden Temple precincts was banned, and the government agreed to discuss rewording part of the constitution. But in the end, it was the killings that people associated with the minority leader, Bhindranwale, the preacher with bandolier and submachine gun. In his cold-blooded confidence, he had converted the Sikhs' holiest shrine into a military camp from which his fanatical followers could conduct their merciless forays. And so in the end, when the government took him on, it was inevitable that the bloody Battle of the Golden Temple happened. A journalist who recently spoke to the holy man said yesterday, Bhindranwale had absolutely no fear of death, but he spoke humbly of it. He was almost cocky about it because he really believed the day would never come when Mrs. Gandhi would take him on.
कौन सहाय मन का हर दिन कौन सहाय कौन सहाय मन का हर दिन कौन सहाय सुने संग